Pictured here is a memorial in Manchester to the people who died in what's known as the Peterloo Massacre. Commissioned by Manchester City Council and designed by Turner Prize-winning artist Jeremy Deller, it's part of a scheme by Caruso's St John Architects, with Conlon Construction as the main contractor and stonework by Manchester specialist Mather and Ellis. It cost £1 million and in 2019 commemorated the 200th anniversary of an infamous day in the history of Manchester and the UK, known as the Peterloo Massacre. The Peterloo Massacre was when troops rode into a crowd of 60,000 men, women and children peacefully demonstrating for parliamentary reform and an end to the Corn Laws that protected the incomes of the wealthy landowners but kept food prices artificially high so the poor went hungry. The cavalry drew their sabres and killed and injured hundreds of the people in the crowd. The event is commemorated by Shelley in his poem The Mask of Anarchy. The memorial is inscribed with the names of 18 people who died on that day, although many more died of their wounds subsequently. There's also the names of the places the protesters came from. All the lettering was cut by hand by the masons of Mather and Ellis. I think it's a beautiful and poignant memorial. It's also a lovely example of British stone and stonemasonry work. The British stones used to create this public work of art are Peak Moor and Cove Red sandstones from Blockstone, Broughton Moor slate from Cumbria from Burlington, Delank granite from Cornwall from Delank granite, Copcrag sandstone from Dunhouse, Carenny pink granite from Fife Glenrock, Whitworth blue and Fletcher Bank sandstones from Marshalls, E. Morehouse and Sons supplied St Bees sandstone, Portland Stone Firms supplied Portland limestone, Winstone, which is a Scottish dolerite, was supplied by Tradstocks, and Cwtibogale slate from Wales was supplied by Welsh Slate. The stones have been mixed and matched because there's a lot of inserts in the 19 courses of stone. They include bronze by the architectural metalworkers of Leander Architectural in Derbyshire, in the Broughton Moor Cumbrian slate in the centre of the circles. Broughton Moor and Welsh Cwtibogale slate are used as inlays in the Peak Moor sandstone. Cove Red sandstone and Delank granite are set into the Whitworth blue. There is St Bees red sandstone and Cwtibogale slate in the Delank granite, Carenny pink granite and the Winstone from Scotland in the Copcrag layer, Dolerite and Copcrag in the St Bees layer, and St Bees and Cwtibogale in the Fletcher Bank. They appear in splendid combinations that delight the eye and lift the spirit. But what are these stones? I'll explain. And from here on, I've generally used fairly random pictures of stonework just because it's more interesting to look at than me talking. Stone. It's a small word, isn't it? But a big subject. And I'm not just talking about geology, which is big enough on its own, but the worldwide industry that supplies stone for use as building materials. What we bundle together as stone is a lot of different materials created in various ways. Confusingly, the way the categories are commonly used, not least by the industry that supplies stone, is not quite how the terms are used by geologists. Nevertheless, there are three broad categories of stone: igneous, sedimentary and metamorphic. Igneous stones are what the stone industry tends to lump together with other hard stones as granites. Often basalt, schist, gneiss, quartzite and other rocks are treated as granites by the trade, although while granite and basalt are igneous rocks, schist, gneiss and quartzite are metamorphic. What is called black granite in the worktop market is not granite because there's no such thing as a black granite. The materials used are generally gabbros, basalts, diorites, anorthosites, or some other kind of hard dark stone. Polishable limestones are often lumped together with marble, although limestone is sedimentary and marble is metamorphic. Any stone used for roofing is often referred to as slate, even though it might be limestone or sandstone, both of which are sedimentary, while actual slate is metamorphic. In the UK, much of the stone used in construction for cladding, hard landscaping, interiors, roofing and all its other uses is imported, although there are about 300 active dimensional stone quarries in the British Isles operated by just over 200 companies. Most of the British stones used as dimensional stones are sedimentary, that is, they're limestone or sandstone. And although it's an oversimplification, it tends to be a north-south divide, with sandstone in the north and limestone in the south. There is some granite, mostly in Cornwall and Scotland, and slate, mostly in Wales, Cornwall and Cumbria, as well as Scotland. And most of the British granite comes from the Delant quarry in Cornwall, while most of the British slate comes from a company called Welsh Slate in Wales, or from Burlington in Cumbria. The minerals available to us here on Earth are largely a legacy of the formation of the solar system some 4.5 billion years ago. The fact that they include carbon, from which you and the rest of life on Earth is made, along with a lot of water, and metals such as gold and lead, shows the sun is not a first-generation star. Larger atoms like these are made by the fusion of atoms in stars and distributed across the galaxy and probably the universe when the stars explode at the end of their lives. I say the minerals available to us are largely a question of what the Earth gathered up from the rocks and dust in space around the sun as it formed, because it's still accruing material from space at a rate of about 35,000 tonnes a year. On the other hand, the Earth loses about 40,000 tonnes of material to space each year, mostly as gas, so in general the Earth is getting smaller, or at least lighter, which accounts for its gradual move further from the sun. But don't worry, the Earth is pretty big, about 6 times 10 to the power of 24 kilograms. So it's losing 1/1000% of its mass each year. The sun will go supernova before the Earth loses a significant amount of its mass or has migrated far enough from the sun for it to be a problem for life on Earth. But I digress. Basically, the Earth contains a lot of material, and most of it is the material gathered as the planet formed in the early days of the solar system 4.5 billion years ago. Generally, the oldest rocks are igneous. These are formed from magma that has squeezed its way up from the silica-rich mantle through the Earth's crust to be exposed at the surface or near to it. This is granite, or spewed out from volcanoes, which is basalt. Igneous rocks are hard and resilient and last a long time, which is why they tend to be used for headstones in cemeteries these days and for plinths on buildings. Nevertheless, once they're exposed to the weather, they start to be eroded, and the sediments are carried by water and wind to places where they accumulate and can be cemented into a new stone. These are sandstones, gritstones and mudstones, which, like granite, contain a lot of crystalline silica, and that can be dangerous to inhale. It's what's called respirable crystalline silica, RCS, which is the dust that comes off stone when it's sawn and shaped. RCS can cause silicosis and cancer. Another form of sedimentary stone is limestone, which is calcium carbonate derived from the remains of animals, especially the shells of shellfish. Some limestones contain a lot of fossilized shells, which can be an attractive feature. These are stones like Mandale fossil or Portland roach. Other limestones are formed from the lime being dissolved in water, creating what's called hard water, then deposited in the same way as limescale forms in a kettle or on taps and in washing machines. Travertine is a particularly well known form of stone deposited in this way. This picture shows a view of Pamukkale in Turkey, where the White Travertine Terrace is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Turkey is one of the world's major suppliers of travertine, which is widely used in construction, particularly for flooring in the UK and other parts of the world. In some places, sand and animal remains accumulated together, forming stones that are both sandstone and limestone and are variously described as Carboniferous sandstone or Silicious limestone, Sussex sandstone, for example. Other minerals can become incorporated into sedimentary stones, forming stones such as magnesium limestone in the northeast of England. It was used to build York Minster and is used for repairs to the Minster today. When stones are buried and subjected to the heat and pressure in the Earth's crust, they can recrystallize. This happens when tectonic plates meet. One is forced under the other, raising the upper plate into mountain ranges such as the Apuan Alps in Italy, where the famous Carrara marble is quarried. Usually, other minerals are combined with the marble to create attractive veining. This is one example of metamorphism, so called because it changes the stone, generally making it stronger, denser, more homogeneous and less porous. Marble is a metamorphosed limestone and slate is metamorphosed mudstone. Gneiss is metamorphosed igneous and sedimentary rock. The crust of the earth is essentially stone of one kind or another, and as we live on the crust, we tend to think of this as being how the planet looks, even though the crust is actually relatively thin. It varies from between about 5 kilometres thick to about 100 kilometres thick. In most places on land, it's about 30 kilometres thick. This map, produced by the British Geological Survey for the Natural Stone Directory, which lists commercially produced stones in the UK with contact details for the companies that extract them, shows the dimensional stone geology of the UK. In the southeast are the younger sandstones and limestones and flint of the Tertiary and Upper and Lower Cretaceous. Above that is the Jurassic, separated on the map into Upper, Middle and Lower Jurassic, indicated in buff and blue. The yellow shows the Triassic red and white sandstones, with the orange on the edge of the yellow indicating red sandstones and dolomitic limestones from the Permian. The grey area is the Carboniferous coal measures and millstone grit, which is another kind of sandstone. The lightest pink in Wales, Cornwall and Scotland is Devonian Old Red sandstone. The mauve is slate from the lower Paleozoic. Cambrian, Ordovician and Silurian form the lower Paleozoic. The light pink, not the lightest, but the second lightest pink, is the pre-Cambrian metamorphic rocks, gneiss, schist and what little true marble the UK has. And the dark red is the igneous rocks, the granites. The map shows the wide spread of geological time represented by the UK, from the Tertiary 65 million years ago in the south to the igneous in the north and west, dating back some 3 billion years. When man first started living in larger communities with a more structured social strata about 6,000 years ago, it's not surprising that he turned to stone as a building material, creating structures using dry stone walling. I.e. they don't have mortar in them. And they survive today in the British Isles of Skara Brae in Orkney and the restored Newgrange in Boyne Valley in Ireland, among others. There were plenty of examples of standing stones, such as Stonehenge, and a few more dry stone structures. Stone that can be used for building is available on or near the surface in most parts of the world. So when the social structures of the Neolithic, which means New Stone Age, made it feasible to start to organise the gathering and building with it, that's what happened. On a rocky planet, it made perfect sense to use rock to build with, just as it does today. Mankind had by then already perfected ways of using stone for tools, so knew something about stone, where and how to find it and fashion it into more useful shapes. Piling stones on top of each other to create resilient shelters and monuments was the next step. Through the Bronze Age and Iron Age, the tools for working stone improved, and the mason's basic tools, which are mallet and chisel, haven't changed that much since then. Early on in the development of building with stone, people discovered their structures would be stronger and less drafty if the gaps between the stones were filled. Mud and clay was used first, then someone discovered that burning limestone produced a better mortar that hardened and didn't wash out when it rained, especially when mixed with sand. And if other materials were added, such as burnt clay or crushed seashells, the strength could be improved even more. We call them pozzolans these days. The fact that Greek and Roman buildings made using lime mortars still stand is a testament to the success of those mortars. Hard cements aren't that much difference to lime mortars in that they're made by burning limestone and get a few additives. Ordinary Portland cement was invented and patented in 1824, and it changed the way we build. However, it's become clear in the intervening period that its use with stone is inadvisable. All stone is porous to a greater or lesser extent, and in order to avoid decaying, the moisture in the stone needs to be able to migrate. Hard cements trap the moisture in the stone, especially in stones like limestone and sandstones, which have a fairly open micropore structure, and that accelerates the decay. They can turn the stone to mud, dissolve its chemicals, break up the stone when trapped water freezes or salts are formed. The availability of concrete as a new building material excited architects such as Le Corbusier, and a modernist movement had less interest in building in stone for a large part of the 20th century. Not that the use of stone went away, it was always a symbol of quality and permanence. It represented a higher status in buildings, both for the fabric of the building and for its internal decoration. As the end of the 20th century approached and we looked forward not just to a new century but also a new millennium, interest in stone grew again. The buildings that had survived the previous millennia, going back as much as 6,000 years, were stone. The change of millennia made people want to at least appear to be building for the whole of the millennium ahead. Less expensive stone from the Far East, India at first and then China basically, although there's a lot of other countries exporting as well, also made it easier to argue for the use of stone. And the development of computer-controlled machinery and diamond tooling to be used on it for fabricating building components in stone de-skilled the use of stone to some extent and made it less expensive. It also speeded up the fabrication of it. Once stonemasons in the UK had turned away from granite because it was hard and difficult to use. In the final decade of the 20th century, a whole new industry started to emerge, making granite worktops for kitchens. Yes, there have been granite worktops before them, but they were only for the particularly well off. Diamond tools used for working stone were so expensive, masons would lock them away at night. These days, they're consumables, which is a double-edged sword. They're cheap because they use industrial diamonds rather than natural diamonds. But the making of the diamonds uses so much energy that diamond tools can represent the highest single encapsulated carbon content contribution to the finished stone worktop. However, one of the reasons for that is because natural stone is a particularly low carbon product. It's dug out of the ground, sawn, shaped and used on, in or around a building. Unlike concrete or steel, stone doesn't require high temperature transformation processes in its manufacture because nature has already done that bit of the hard work. As concerns about global warming have ramped up, particularly since the turn of the millennium, the encapsulated carbon content of building materials, the construction industry in general and the building it makes has become an issue. The construction and use of buildings account for some 40% of the UK's CO2 emissions each year. Reducing that can quickly improve the UK's performance. The production of concrete and steel each account for something approaching 10% of the world's annual CO2 emissions, each of them. 15 Clerkenwell Close, a 7-storey building in Islington, London, with a structural stone skeleton, shows how much carbon could be reduced by using stone rather than concrete or steel. The building contains 8 apartments, including the home of the building's architect, Armin Taha, and several office spaces. Armin chose French limestone for the project to honour the original structure on the site, which was an 11th century Norman nunnery. The stone frame reduced the building material's carbon footprint by 90% compared with using steel or concrete, and costs 25% less. The stone used is blocks straight from the quarry, which is not to everyone's taste, and at one stage the council had issued an order for the building to be demolished, although a couple of architectural awards have muted some of the opposition to it. The government is addressing the issue of carbon in new build through building and planning regulations as part of its target to make the country carbon neutral by 2050. But 80% of the buildings that will be in use in the UK in 2050 have probably already been built, and about 20% of them were built before 1919. So some effort has to be put into the existing building stock, as well as changing the way we build. Increasing building life rather than continually demolishing structures and rebuilding is one way of reducing the carbon footprint of construction. But the practical reasons for using stone are not its only attraction. It has a certain attraction because it comes straight from the planet that is our home. Stonemason Alex Woodcock sums it up in a book he wrote about his life as a stonemason on the theme of Romanesque stone carving. The book's called King of Dust: Adventures in Forgotten Sculpture. It's published by Little Toller Books and is well worth a read as a piece of literature, as well as for its exploration of Romanesque sculpture and stoneworking. In it, Alex says, "There's a mystical pull to stone. It's the raw material of the earth, a handshake away from the basic elements themselves. We associate it with longevity, origins. We say something is carved in stone if it's binding and unalterable. We use it to commemorate the dead, cutting the names of the lost into its fabric, connecting them with the long cycles of geology, and perhaps, by doing so, immortality. Depending on the type of stone and how it's worked, it can be either low status or high status, ballast or palast. In archaeological terms, it's the first age. Stone has served us since the very beginnings as tools, building materials, art." That's the end of the quote from Alex. I leave you here with some words from a stonemason who was giving a demonstration of her skills at the Weald and Downham Museum of Buildings in Chichester, West Sussex. She's Marie Louise Bolland. I beg her pardon. She's Marie Louise Bolland. Here's what she had to say. Could you just explain what made you want to become a mason?
Well, I actually studied history of art at university, and archaeology was my subsid. And as part of my dissertation, I wrote my dissertation on Anglo-Saxon and Viking sculpture in the northeast. So I had a theoretical interest in carving and masonry, and I worked for a number of years in a totally different field, but then started at a night class in London. And I carved one night a week for about 3 hours.
Was that in stone or wood?
In stone. Mm-hmm. And I just fell in love with working stone. It just felt like it was the right material for me. And I'm kind of fascinated by the history of the tools and the age of the stone and the geology and everything, and the craft. So I decided to go back to college and learn properly how to work stone. So I enrolled at Weymouth and got a place, and really to get my tool skills under my belt and learn the proper process, and then see where it leads to.
And are you glad you took that route and have done that now?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I feel much more content and much happier. I'm not sure what direction it's going to lead in, but I'm just happy to take any opportunity that comes up and really kind of see what happens.
See where it goes. Okay, Thank you very much.